Captain Herbert Sobel was a complex figure whose legacy has been both celebrated and condemned. He is best known for his role in creating Easy Company, the elite group of soldiers whose experiences during World War II were immortalized in the book and television series Band of Brothers. But Sobel's leadership style was controversial, and his methods for training his men were harsh and unforgiving. Herbert Maxwell Sobel was born into an affluent Jewish family in Chicago, Illinois on January 28, 1912. His parents, Max and Dora Sobel, were successful business people, and he had an older brother named Julian, as well as two younger sisters named Maxine and Ruth. As a young man, Sobel attended the prestigious Culver Military Academy and excelled on the swim team. He later graduated from the University of Illinois in Urbana and Chicago, where he was highly involved in student activities such as the business manager of the yearbook and the B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation, a Jewish organization dedicated to social and religious work among students. He was also a member of the Infantry Officers Club in Chicago. Standing at a height of 6 feet, Sobel was a lanky individual. His physical appearance was later used as a basis for the actor David Schwimmer, who portrayed Sobel in the home box office series Band of Brothers. After completing his studies, Sobel became a reserve officer until he was sent to Fort Riley, Kansas to serve with the 506th. As the first member of Easy Company, Sobel was promoted to commanding officer. He had high expectations for his men and demanded excellence in all aspects of training, including marching, marksmanship, and physical fitness. He believed that his soldiers needed to be prepared for combat at all times, and he was known for his strict adherence to military rules. As the commanding officer of Easy Company during their training, Herbert Sobel was known for his toughness and strict adherence to military rules. He devised fitness tests that included water endurance and prohibited his men from drinking without permission. As the company progressed, Sobel was promoted from first lieutenant to captain. Sobel's inspections were notoriously thorough, and few men passed them without having their weekend passes revoked or being forced to complete a grueling 3-mile run up and down Currahee. Despite his hard work and dedication to training Easy Company, Sobel was disliked by almost every man under his command. Stephen Ambrose, a historian who chronicled the exploits of Easy Company, referred to Sobel as a petty tyrant due to his arrogance and strict control over the unit. Sobel's harsh demeanor earned him a nickname among his troops, Black Swan. His reputation as a tyrant only grew as he became more demanding, even punishing soldiers for minor infractions or imagined breaches of command. His mood swings were particularly troubling during inspections, as he would often mark up several soldiers in a row before moving on to another group. As the men of Easy Company prepared to march to the port, Sobel heard an officer was going to be left behind for being unsuitable. He immediately went to the office and gave a passionate defense, resulting in the man being allowed to stay on. Sobel also encouraged family members of his men to write to them often to give them a reason to fight. Sobel's harshness and constant shouting earned him ridicule behind his back. He had a high-pitched, raspy voice and often used interesting phrases such as "Hi Yo Silver." The men knew that he couldn't read a map and was terrible at tactical fighting. They took advantage of this, with George Luz even mimicking a higher-ranking officer's voice to trick Sobel into cutting barbed wire and proceeding with training. Sobel's foolishness eventually caught up with him, and he found himself without a single friend in Easy Company as they headed off to Europe. Once in Europe, Sobel's NCOs formed a rebellion against him and handed in their stripes, along with a formal protest against him. Despite his removal from command in February 1944 and placement in command of a new division training center, Sobel's contributions to Easy Company and their training could not be denied. As the war raged on in 1945, Sobel was reunited with Easy Company, the men he had trained. Many of his trainees held high positions in the company. Winters saw Sobel's reaction and believed it was bittersweet for him. Stephen Ambrose also remarked that Sobel must have been doing something right back in the summer of '42 at Toccoa. However, there is not much information about what Sobel was doing during the war. He served as the regimental S4 throughout the war, which meant he mostly worked with supplies and logistics. Despite the passage of time, Winters continued to hold a grudge against Sobel. Winters refused to return his silk map or pay $75 for it. The map had been sewn into his belt throughout the entire war, and it had a lot of sentimental value for him. Instead, he wrote a letter to Sobel that simply read "Nuts" and signed it Richard D. Winters, Major Commandant. He never paid the fine and hung the map in his office. Winters and Sobel had their most famous encounter after Winters had been promoted to Major. Sobel ignored him, but Winters called out to him, "Captain, we recognize and honor the rank." Sobel reluctantly saluted him. Once the war had ended, Captain Herbert Sobel settled down and got married to a former nurse he had met in Italy. She was a Catholic girl from a farming family who worked at a hospital in Chicago. Sobel had run into her while visiting a wounded soldier, and they fell in love. Despite their love, Sobel's family did not accept his wife due to their differences in religion and background. However, Sobel made sure their children were raised Catholic and they attended Mass regularly. Although he did not go with them, he showed his support for their beliefs. Sobel, who had been a harsh and cruel father, became a loving and attentive husband to his wife. He woke up early every day to make her breakfast, and in the winter, he would go outside and heat up their car for her to drive to work. The couple had 3 sons named Herbert Jr., Michael, and Richard, and also had a baby girl who sadly passed away a few days after birth. They lived in the same house that Sobel had grown up in, and despite his troubled relationship with his own father, he was a great dad to his children. According to Michael, one of Sobel's sons, his father was always loving and attentive, and doted on his mother. Sobel never used profanity, never lost his temper, and never raised a hand to his children, even when they deserved it. On Sundays, Sobel would make pancakes and invite neighborhood kids to come in and join them. Herbert Sobel was a man who loved his family deeply, and he showed it in his own unique ways. He gave each of his sons a nickname. Michael was Inky, his brothers were Footsie and Skooky. They played baseball and did workouts together. Michael recalls that his father was always in great physical shape and could do push-ups with ease. In fact, as kids, they did 50 to 75 push-ups per night, and their dad did them right alongside them. Sobel served actively in the Korean War until 1953. He then remained in the reserves until he retired as a lieutenant colonel. After that, he worked as a credit manager for a company and never missed a day of work. He put all his savings towards his son's college expenses, telling them that education was second only to family. However, during the Vietnam War, Sobel's relationship with his family was strained. One of his sons was drafted into the Coast Guard, and one was diabetic. Michael was away at Berkeley, and to make matters worse, he was arrested for protesting at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. This strained his father's relationship with him even more. In 1970, Michael had transferred to Southern Illinois University, where he was keeping a low profile due to his unpopular political views. He had no contact with his father, Sobel, for years until the police finally found him and reported that Sobel had attempted suicide. Sobel had shot himself in the head but survived, although the bullet had entered from the left side, which was rather strange since he was right-handed. The injury left him blind, and he was moved to assisted living in Waukegan, Illinois. Unfortunately, the conditions there were poor and was often unresponsive or in a dreamlike state. Eventually, Sobel's wife divorced him, and he remained in assisted living for 17 years until he died on September 30th, 1987, due to malnutrition. Surprisingly, his family did not attend his funeral, but his sons were not bothered by the portrayal of their father in the home box office series and believed that someone needed to take the blame. One of Sobel's men's son met Michael at a speaking engagement and hugged him, saying that his father told him to because Sobel was the reason he was alive. It was a touching moment, and Michael wished his father could have heard it. Rest in peace, and goodbye, Captain Herbert Sobel.